There are many zones in the world that have become secret. At first there were regular cities or simply nothing, and then there are zones that are not marked on maps, and the rare people who want to get there are chased away by strict patrols. There are a lot of such cities in the former Soviet Union. In this video we will tell only about one of them, which is known as Aralsk 7. Its history begins with the first years of Soviet power and continues to this day. There is everything in this story: research, peaceful developments, battle viruses, loss of life, ignorance of commoners, geological changes, and even evacuation, which itself made the place dangerous. You can't get in there legally now, but I wouldn't try to. All because combat viruses were being developed there, and there's still no guarantee that they aren't already active. Simply put, it is better not to touch this place, which was an island and became a peninsula. Aralsk 7 was left in such a hurry that they even abandoned all the equipment. Where is Aralsk 7? For some, Aralsk 7 will say nothing and they are more familiar with the name Kantebek. That is the name of the city, which has been closed since the 1990s and is located on Vozrozdeniya Island in the Republic of Karakalpakstan. Territorially, it is located in the northwestern part of Uzbekistan. Kantebek was an administrative and residential area of the test site where biological weapons of all kinds were tested. The tests were conducted on animals that were brought in both from the USSR and from abroad. All in all, there were about 1,500 people permanently living on this territory, including scientists, researchers, and their family members. In addition, about 800 military personnel were involved in conducting experiments, as well as providing security and secrecy. Most of them were conscripts. Now in the city and on the island, which has become a peninsula, there are only patrols that suppress attempts to get into the exclusion zone. What's in the city of Kantebek now? The city was originally designed as a full-fledged settlement with stores, cinemas, parks, and even a stadium when it was created for people to live and recreate. Now the city is in a state of disrepair. The buildings could not be residential, even if the area is open, and there is even less left of the rest of the infrastructure. Scientists have found out why some people believe in conspiracy theories about the coronavirus. Where were biological weapons created in the USSR? The test site and research center was originally planned back in the early years of the Soviet Union. Even then, the command of the Red Army puzzled over the choice of location for the construction of the facility. There were many demands. It was necessary to find a place that would be far enough away from populated areas. Preferably, it should be fenced off from ordinary people by a water barrier that is, located on an island. At the same time, it was easier to maintain the secrecy that would be an integral part of such a facility. As a result, the first polygon was located in the Tver region near the town of Ostashkov on Gorodomlya Island. It was fenced off from the mainland by waters of Lake Seliger. Initially, there were even plans to build the landfill on one of the islands of Lake Baikal. But either they couldn't find an island of proper size or it was too far away from all the other similar facilities, but they changed their minds to put it there. At one time there was a lot of equipment and the work was in full swing. Now it is a shambles. In 1941 the laboratory was evacuated far away from the combat zone and was moved to Kirov, and a little later to Saratov. It was not until 1942 that the testing ground and laboratory settled on Vozrozdeniya Island. Why would viruses need a spiking protein? Interestingly enough, the island was used for lethal research, but there were also schools, kindergartens, and just recreational areas. On one side of the island, animals were infected with deadly viruses, while on the other side, people were socializing, spending time, having romantic gatherings on the shore of the Aral Sea, and even bathing in it. The military city Aralsk 5, Ural, was built to manage what was going on in the closed Aralsk 7. It also housed the Range Maintenance Regiment, Military Unit 25484. It included a vehicle battalion and a large number of personnel. Naturally, everything was classified, but samples of viruses and other biologically active elements were brought here from all over the Soviet Union. An interesting fact is that the only airfield with 4 runways in the USSR was located on the island. This was necessary in order for it to accept aircraft of any type in conditions of strong winds, which are the norm for this place. The runways were arranged according to the wind rose, and it was always possible to choose the direction of approach for any aircraft. This is how the local airfield looked like from above. Now the concrete slabs were dismantled, only the outlines of the runway remained. How were the tests conducted in Aralsk-7? Laboratory building, where the main research and test preparation on the range were conducted, was located 3 kilometers southwest of Aralsk-7, Kantebek. It was a whole complex of buildings and structures, where hundreds of people worked. Animals from the range were also brought there, over which anthrax, bubonic plague, brucellosis, tularemia, and other especially dangerous infection spores were sprayed. The training ground itself was located in the southern part of the island. The location was not chosen by chance. Even though the dispersed spores were then deactivated, if there was anything left, according to the local wind pattern, it had to move away from the island and not affect the residential area. Despite the cleverness of the location, on at least one occasion the substance cloud affected people. It was simply blown toward the research vessel. Several people died as a result. Most of the experiments were conducted on monkeys, but dogs, rats, horses, and other animals were often chosen. It was monkeys that were chosen mainly to test the effects of viruses affecting the lungs. The respiratory systems of humans and monkeys are very similar, and the choice was obvious. The monkeys themselves were usually brought from Abkhazia, but sometimes they came from more distant parts of the world. For example, once 5,000 primates were brought from Africa for experiments. After spraying substances in the air, researchers in chemical protective suits took the cells to the laboratory and conducted their experiments. A vaccine against dangerous viruses. Naturally, the facility was not limited to military topics, and it also had a peaceful purpose. So, for example, the island was engaged in the development of a vaccine. True, it was often a vaccine against viruses that were being developed for military use, but there were other studies as well. Suffice it to say that the first work initially conducted at the laboratory when it was still on Lake Seliger was the search for a vaccine against foot and mouth disease. How does the coronavirus pandemic affect animals? The beginning of the end of the laboratory can be considered the 1960s. The Aral Sea was shrinking, and it was then that the increase in the area of the island began to jeopardize the secrecy of the facilities that were located on it. Nevertheless, the work of the test site and laboratory continued until 1992, when at the end of the Soviet Union an order was given to relocate the laboratory, test site, military base and scientists with their families to Kirov. Not only the scientists lived on the island, but also their families. Naturally, everyone left. Interestingly, the evacuation was so rushed that people left everything they had. Homes were left with household items, the military abandoned their equipment, and scientists left a substantial part of their equipment for research. Naturally, the results of their experiments were also left on the island. They included biomaterial, animal remains, and hastily buried live viruses. Is it possible to get to Aralsk-7? Because of this, it was forbidden to visit the island, but then it was not so easy to do so because of the preservation of the water barrier. Now the Aral Sea has become so shallow that the island has become a peninsula and can be accessed on foot. Not so long ago, a checkpoint was put up on the island, which is supposed to limit the movement of people and not allow outsiders to enter the territory of the former secret facilities. Despite the bans, such a place simply could not but become a magnet for stalkers, thrill seekers, and simply looters who wanted to get hold of what was still left on the island after the evacuation. So during the year, there were quite a lot of visitors. Later, the number gradually decreased, but those who wanted to tickle their nerves and conquer the next exclusion zone were still there. All the more so because the biological threat itself is not as terrible as the radiation. Now such places are of interest to thrill seekers. Before, it was all more groomed. The former laboratory has been visited more than once by research groups. In particular, in 2002, the island was visited by more than 130 virologists from the United States. It is believed that the area is now safe, but there has been no confirmation or denial. The reason for this is the abandoned burial sites with animal remains, where viruses can still be active. At one time there was even information that the burial grounds were finally mothballed, but this too has not been confirmed by officials. Is Aralsk 7 dangerous? It is too early to say what will happen next and whether the laboratory is a threat in its current form. Most are inclined to believe that there are no real risks, but in this case, it is not clear why the access to the island was cut off for ordinary people. Perhaps it is because there are too many ruined buildings and it might just be dangerous to visit them. It is also possible that there is equipment left there that makes sense to guard, but this is unlikely. The biggest danger from Aralsk 7 right now is the possibility of structures collapsing when someone is in them. Or is it not? Of course, the fact that viruses in the samples are still active cannot be ruled out, but there is not much to worry about. They are isolated from the big Earth and by themselves should not get to humans. The reason for this is the abandoned burial sites with animal remains, where viruses can still be active. At one time there was even information that the burial grounds were finally mothballed, but this too has not been confirmed by officials. Is Aralsk 7 dangerous? It is too early to say what will happen next and whether the laboratory is a threat in its current form. Most are inclined to believe that there are no real risks, but in this case, it is not clear why the access to the island was cut off for ordinary people. Perhaps it is because there are too many ruined buildings and it might just be dangerous to visit them. It is also possible that there is equipment left there that makes sense to guard, but this is unlikely. The biggest danger from Aralsk 7 right now is the possibility of structures collapsing when someone is in them. Or is it not? Of course, the fact that viruses in the samples are still active cannot be ruled out, but there is not much to worry about. They are isolated from the big Earth and by themselves should not get to humans. I thank you for watching. Your support is very important to me. Your comments and thumbs up motivate me to release new videos on interesting topics. Subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the new videos.